Here today in Aspen to follow a very tough act to follow. I think it was great to hear from Brian and Commissioner Gomez, but we're going to change tacks a little bit. We've got a great panel here to talk about whether AI changes the economics of telecom. If you listen to almost any policy discussion, earnings call, or workplace Zoom, I think it's become apparent that artificial intelligence is changing everything from the way that we search for and organize information. Oh. Did I start before my panelists were fully in place? I'm so sorry.
I have a chair at my height.
It's a question of who has a chair at the table.
I believe all my panelists should have a seat at the table. As I was saying, everything is changing with the advent of AI, from the way that we search and organize information to, yes, the way that the networks carry all of our information and how our networks are constructed and how the business models surrounding them are put together. I'm Kelcee Griffis. I'm a reporter for Bloomberg News, and I cover the telecom industry. I'm excited to be here today with a fantastic panel, and we're going to talk about just how much AI is changing our industry. We're going to talk about the networks of running, or the economics of running a network, and the ways in which those networks are managed and kept safe, and how all of these things are changing. I'd like to go ahead and ask my panelists to introduce themselves briefly and to tell us why AI is an important topic for your organization. Do you want to start, Harold?
Sure. So I'm Harold Feld. I'm Senior Vice President of Public Knowledge. We're a nonprofit advocacy group based in Washington, D.C. that focuses, among other things, on digital divide issues and access and affordability issues. And you all heard Commissioner Gomez refer to the AI economy and how we are going to need to make sure that everyone is being connected in a way that allows them to participate in the AI economy. I'll add also that I'm only engaged in one part of PK's overall AI, which deals with public AI and copyright and a lot of other important issues. I just do the boring hardware stuff.
My name is Melissa Mann. I am the Chief Public Policy Officer at Lumen Technologies. The short version for us of why AI matters is that really at Lumen, if you've followed us over the last few years, we are not really adapting to AI at the edges. We have reorganized our company around the opportunity that AI has created for us. For years, the network has been treated as the plumbing in a world in which it's really about how quickly can you move data from cloud to cloud, from AI model to AI model. The east-west traffic is really where we see a tremendous amount of opportunity, and we've moved in that direction. Today, Lumen really sits as the trusted network for AI. We've done about $13 billion in deals with our hyperscalers and others in the private connectivity fabric space, building out the connectivity that they need for their data centers. And we're building that network today. So we are projected to exit 2031 with about 58 million fiber miles. We started this as one of the largest fiber networks in North America. That's up from what we will exit 2025, or we exited 2025 with 17 million fiber miles. So we're 3Xing the capacity of our network during that time frame. And it's really, for us, it's not just a engineering question, it's really a policy question. Our ability to meet these demands is one of, can we get the permits we need to build as quickly as the hyperscalers need us to?
Hi, my name is Giulia McHenry. I lead the public policy team at AT&T. And at AT&T, we are really focused on building the AI-ready network for the future. We recognize that all of these AI tools, resources, toolkits really aren't worth much if they cannot be connected to the consumer. And so we have been focused for a long time on ensuring that our networks are all AI-ready. And we've been seeing quite a bit of growth. So since 2023, in the last 3 years, we've seen 15% annual increases in data traffic, which, of course, not all related to AI, but quite a bit of it is related to AI. And in the next 3 years, we're expecting that data traffic to double. So we are really ensuring that we're ready for AI to come across our networks, and we can continue to serve our customers with it.
Hello, my name is Mark Walker, and I lead the technology policy team at CableLabs. For those not familiar, CableLabs is the R&D lab for the global cable broadband industry. And our role in the industry is to help develop and align sort of the broadband technologies of the future for our members. That includes wireless technologies, that includes fiber optic technologies, that includes HFC technologies. And it also includes driving the security underlying those technologies. And I know we'll get into that here in a little bit. But as we think about sort of how AI is affecting our work, it's really across 3 dimensions. You know, as Giulia just mentioned, AI is driving more traffic, more broadband traffic to consumers, to end users, to enterprises, et cetera. And we're really seeing, in particular, a change in that traffic. It is becoming more upstream heavy. The growth of that total traffic is really being seen in the upstream. So as we think about the network technologies of the future, we need to make sure we are incorporating and adapting and accommodating these changes. Secondly, you know, our members in CableLabs are integrating AI into our operations, and you know, in particular, to drive increased reliability of those networks. You know, consumers now expect their networks to always work, sort of full stop. And using AI to be able to detect faults quicker, sooner, and address them in real time is critical to keeping those networks up and running. So for example, we have been developing sort of fiber sensing technologies that allows the operator to see when a fiber is damaged or cut, sort of in real time, and the exact location of that impairment, to be able to direct a technician to that location without wasting time driving miles and miles to try to figure out where that damage is. And lastly, we are using AI as we develop new network technologies. We're leveraging AI for simulations, for software development, for all the things that we've heard today. So driving that innovation cycle faster and faster. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much. I think that was a really great overview of the different perspectives you all are bringing to this conversation, and kudos to Scott and his team for putting together such a well-rounded panel, because I think this is going to be really helpful to look at this from multiple angles. So if you all will indulge me for a second, I want to start with a table setting question, because I feel like, at least in my reporting, we often talk about consumer telecom networks as separate entities from data centers and the enterprise fiber networks that are serving some of these hyperscaler customers. But obviously, all of these parts of the network have to talk to each other. Is there a reason for maybe this perceived compartmentalization? And are we starting to see maybe some convergence of these different communication systems as we head into the AI era?
So I'm going to start from a consumer perspective, which is we think of this because consumers aren't seeing tremendous benefit to themselves directly from the deployment of all of this fiber. Now, I believe that there's a lot of opportunity, because when you bring fiber into these areas that we've been talking about for the last 2 days, which tend to be isolated areas where you can build these, you're bringing fiber into areas that are small communities that would otherwise not see fiber. But we are seeing that some of the hyperscalers and some of the others are treating these like their own private networks, which they are, and there is not any effort to leverage this to bring fiber to areas that have not seen fiber. So we've been advising, to the extent communities are not just looking for bands, that part of negotiations be opening up that fiber so that it can serve either as backhaul in communities that otherwise don't have backhaul, or it can serve as a place where fiber connections can take place so that it becomes actually economically feasible to bring fiber to these communities.
Yeah, so perhaps Lumen might be contributing to some of the confusion here, because our story has really been about aggressively pivoting. We've divested much of our consumer assets and are really focused on this large enterprise hyperscaler market right now. But to your point here, when we're building these networks to these data centers in rural communities, I think there was an article yesterday maybe that talked about the restrictions on some of those builds. I think there's some confusion around what that means. You know, if a hyperscaler's buying an IRU, maybe they have rights on that strand, but as we're building, we've been very open, we're building those dedicated routes for the hyperscaler, but we're putting our own fiber alongside that. And that fiber, kind of in the notion of a rising tide floats all boats, that fiber can easily be utilized as backhaul middle mile for these smaller communities to interconnect in order to expand that broadband access.
Thanks, Kelcee. From my perspective, I actually think the network has already converged, right, in many respects. I think, we serve both obviously individual consumers, but we also do serve a number of hyperscalers, a number of other AI-related businesses that aren't necessarily hyperscalers. And in each of those incidents, in each of those cases, our goal is to deliver the fiber, the resources they need, and that means, and anything that goes east-west inside of an AI hyperscaler eventually has to come to some consumer, be them enterprise or individual consumers. So for us, we see this as really one network that may be serving a lot of different, really, frankly, a growing diversity of devices and humans and machines, but it's still one network from our perspective.
Yeah, I don't disagree on sort of the network part, but serving consumers is very different than serving data centers. The services they need, the marketing, how you connect, the back office operations, how you acquire those consumers versus enterprises are very different. And, we do see specialization in the market. There are obviously many operators do provide connectivity to both data centers and consumers, but there are many specialized providers too. Lumen has sort of shifted its business, Zayo. Many of the hyperscalers basically build and own their own networks too, between their data centers. They're not really, well, I shouldn't speak what their business model is, but they often operate their own networks too. So yeah, there is sort of one network. Some of the technologies are very similar, but it's very different sort of serving a consumer versus serving a data center.
I would also add, I think there's a lot of diversity among the hyperscalers about how they're experimenting with, is it one large massive data center across a region of the country, or is it individualized data centers that are closer to the consumer? So I think you see a lot of diversity on both sides.
So, Mark, I want to go back to something that you were saying. I think in some of our prep work for this panel, you had some interesting thoughts on how the networks are pushing forward the frontier of AI development. Do you see our networks, as they currently stand, ever becoming a bottleneck to the future of AI development?
Yeah, well, I think at a foundational level, there is no AI without the networks. That shouldn't be surprising to anybody in this room. So we have to continue to advance the network technologies to ensure that they don't become the bottlenecks. There's huge investment, obviously, going into AI and the market values of them, and the performance they need will continue to increase, and that's both at the data center, but also for the consumers, the users, the end users, the small businesses, the schools, the hospitals. That's all going to drive sort of increased needs on the network. So we have to continue to sort of invest and drive that. And this is both on sort of fiber and traditional wire networks, but also wireless. So this does have implications for spectrum policy. When we think about sort of how a consumer and end user accesses AI applications, that's going to be over Wi-Fi for the predominant part. Today, as we've heard many times, your smartphone, 90% of that data goes over Wi-Fi. We expect that trend to continue as we think about AI applications. But then when we look at sort of industrial commercial applications, some of those ultra reliable, ultra low latency applications, think factory floor with robots. Those wireless technologies will largely be provided over private networks, private 5G, private 6G networks, because they're going to want to maintain sort of very tight control over those networks to get that sub-millisecond type of performance that they'll need. So yes, network technologies must continue to advance to ensure that AI can continue to advance.
I'll just add, there are analyst estimates that the fiber capacity has to double by 2029, or it's going to become as constraining as chips and power. We're obviously doing a significant amount of building ourselves, but you'll hear me come back to this theme quite often. It really comes down to permitting. If we're going to actually do this, if we're going to double our fiber capacity across the industry, we've got to fix permitting. We can build a fiber hut, an inline amplifier for our network in about 2 months. Permitting might take me 12. So we've got to address it.
I would,
Oh, you go ahead.
just beyond permitting, I would also say, as Mark was alluding to, the costs of the supply chain are skyrocketing, right? I mean, we have fiber costs. Each one, a large data center will use as much fiber as we use in a year to lay down, right? So that as we, there's a question about how much of these new costs and investments we make are going to be going into the inflation in costs, so.
Right, and just to elaborate on that point, which is we get a choice in very blunt terms between BEAD build out and build out to hyperscalers when there's a shortage. If there's only so much to go around, and the BEAD stuff, first of all, is waited a godly long amount of time, but is under particular contracts to deliver at particular cost points, and if they can't, those contractors pull out because it's no longer worthwhile. So we may actually come to a question where, as a policy matter, we have to start deciding, are we going to hold people to the contract timelines for BEAD build out, knowing that that is going to create a choke point for some of the hyperscalers, or are hyperscalers going to be able to say, I'll pay whatever it takes in order to get this out, and those that can't afford to meet that price are just going to have to wait that much longer for build out.
I think skipping ahead a little bit in our discussion for a moment, I want to stick with this idea of the economics of AI and telecom showing up in the cost for your network and ultimately the cost for consumers. How are you seeing things like higher memory prices and higher fiber prices affecting you and ultimately your consumers?
So just as a general matter, I know we always talk about memory and the shortage of memory and how data centers are using memory. We need to remember that every component in the network uses memory too, from the Wi-Fi access point to the router to the modems for whether it's HFC or fiber. They all use memory, and that goes back the whole way through the network. So as we are building those additional network miles, upgrading our networks, that increase in memory costs flows directly through, increases the capital costs, and therefore increases the cost of providing services. So yes, that does flow straight through.
And I'll just add, this is a problem from a consumer perspective because we're talking about things in the network that consumers don't see. So if I'm a customer and I'm paying for the same speeds, but because of cost in the overall network, the cost to me has to rise. That obviously creates a great deal of frustration on the consumer side because I don't understand what's going on, that suddenly the price has gone up by $5 or $10 or whatever for what to me looks like no improvement whatsoever, when in fact it's because of these hidden costs hidden to the consumer within the network.
Is there anything you wanted to add on the costs that you're seeing, Melissa or Giulia?
I think that sums it up. I think our as AT&T, we're a pretty big player, and we're the kind of the biggest game in the fiber space not too long ago. But we've been feeling the pressure and doing our best to manage with longer term contracts. But still, prices are going up, and we are obviously better positioned than a lot. I would also add, there are other supply chain risks that are building on top of this. A lot of global instability and onshoring issues, which are also making it more complicated and more expensive to find the devices that our network and our consumers rely on.
Similarly, we really were pretty early in inking a lot of these agreements, so we were able to do some things with longer-term contracts early on, but we, like everyone else, are feeling the impacts of the higher cost.
Well, Melissa, I want to pick up on something else that you said a moment ago, which is kind of toward this idea of Lumen evolving from a legacy telecom company to serving some of these hyperscaler customers. I'm curious what you're seeing in the different traffic patterns that AI is driving, and I'm curious to hear how you're shifting your networks to be ready for that.
Sure. So when these networks were built 30 years ago, they were really designed for a consumer sending an email, downloading something from a website, et cetera. What we're seeing today, as I touched on earlier, is a significant amount of this east-west traffic. So not only is the direction of the traffic changing, but the composition is changing as well. We're seeing up to 50% of internet traffic today driven by autonomous agents, bots, that type of activity. So that's really what we're designing for. The other thing we're having to design for is that latency is no longer a preference. There's a floor on latency for many of these use cases and applications. What we're doing is, obviously, I've touched on the build. So we're building the physical foundation itself, tripling the size of our network. We're also working really hard on the programmable layer of our network. You'll hear us talk about this a lot. Our customers, large enterprises, want to be able to move their data quickly. They want to be able to scale up and down capacity. They want more control over how they use the network. The other part of this is really the connected ecosystem. So 9 out of 10 of our customers are using more than one AI provider, more than one cloud provider. And that is really where we recently acquired a company called Alkira, and that's about giving them one pane of glass to be able to move and move their data among clouds, among different AI providers as well. So that's really what that acquisition is about, is really that connected ecosystem and allowing our customers that flexibility. What that really looks like in practice is when the grid spikes in Virginia and you've got energy prices spiking, being able to move your workloads to maybe Montana, where you've got lower energy costs, you've got some GPU capacity to be able to handle those workloads.
Amazing. Kind of sticking with that theme, Giulia, I want to turn to you. How is AT&T thinking about connecting to data centers and scaling up to meet demand for AI? I know this is work that AT&T has had underway for a long time, but I'm curious about how you might think about these considerations differently than some of the hyperscalers, and maybe how are some of those considerations the same?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, as we alluded to earlier, the internet was really built to serve millions of consumers, right? Individual devices operated by consumers at interspersed times throughout the day, and most of that was downloading information, right? And I think what you begin to see, well, what you have been seeing with AI is far more of that multi-directional data transfers, always on, continuous blips. So we have been, really focused, and obviously, and the needs are different, right? We have much lower latency needs, much more symmetric traffic. So we have really been focused on building the fiber and 6G networks to meet those demands. More symmetric traffic, far more demand in data, more devices, agents, machines, all on the network. And we think, obviously, fiber is really well suited for this type of data, but we also need a mobile network that can sustain, automated vehicles and that sort of thing. So as for the hyperscalers, the east-west traffic is the traffic, just to be so we're defining it, is the traffic moving between data centers, right? And so there's an immense amount of traffic there. Much of it is learning and inference. And much of it, frankly, doesn't necessarily touch our network, or we have dark fiber that we're serving those customers with. But our role then becomes much clearer when that information is moving, onto the internet, and eventually it has to reach consumers. And again, like I said, we're working with hyperscalers to figure out where the right connection points are on the network. Different hyperscalers have different approaches to this. So, again, some are building massive data centers in low-cost locations, but then some are looking more localized to ensure that their compute is closer to the consumer. So it's really, to be honest, I think the diversity of how we're looking at this network is really expanding quickly.
It's a great point that both you and Mark brought up, I think, that we can't forget mobile networks in this equation. We can't only think about the wireline aspect or the fiber aspect. All of this traffic is talking to each other. So I want to hear just from the table generally on the areas that you're using AI to reduce network constraints versus areas that you're having to think about constraints imposed by AI. I think as we were discussing ahead of the panel, the token economy, for example, is not cheap, and some of those constraints are showing up now. I pulled some interesting stats from a Wall Street Journal article a couple weeks ago that said specifically for AT&T, open models are going to account for 25% of AT&T's AI usage going forward. Over time, that's expected to rise to about 70 to 80%. And the article noted that AT&T has used an average of 45 billion AI tokens a day. So Giulia, I wonder if you would like to start with addressing that question. How is AT&T managing this?
Yeah, so, and I will tell you, I think I spend a lot of time listening to AI podcasts to understand tokenomics and that sort of thing, but like...
Podcast about AI, not generated by AI, right?
Right, yeah, this is about AI. I had some long, camp drop-offs where I was just consuming as much of this information as possible. And so I don't think AT&T was alone in a little bit of a freak out, holy crap, how many of these tokens we're using, and obviously the prices of those tokens are going up. So as the Wall Street Journal article, which featured Andy Marcus, our CDO, really alluded to, we see in many ways open weight models as a solution to many of these concerns. Particularly, I should step back and say AT&T uses AI and has been using AI for a long time throughout its network, from essentially sort of handheld real-time AI working alongside the technicians that are in the home. So the AI is both communicating with the customer and with the technician to ensure that home visit is far more efficient. And then into our network detection, ensuring the network is stronger, more resilient, being able to kind of monitor the network more, and everything in between. But we see open weight models as really becoming a bigger part of our strategy because especially for telco-specific needs, it's offering more flexibility, lower costs, because the cost of tokens is obviously driven by the compute of individual AI companies, so the costs become lower, and then we can improve the way AI works within our network faster, deliver that to the customers faster, and create more accurate service. So it gives us more control over the AI because we are working with open weight models. So.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that point, open weight models provide enterprises, network operators, anyone, more options, more competition. It allows, if you're using an open weight model, you can run it on your hardware. You don't have to run it on sort of the big AI company's hardware. Closed weight model has to run on Anthropic's cloud or OpenAI or whoever's. So that gives the enterprise sort of far more options and competition. Second point I'd make is not every task has to go to the frontier, the latest frontier model. There's plenty of use cases, narrow AI use cases where you can sort of optimize sort of that cost and functionality structure. You don't need to send every sort of, particularly when you're talking about some of these network management things, they're very narrow tasks. Yeah. You don't need to run that on Fable or Mythos or whatever the latest is. So I think having those open weight models just provides an enterprise with a lot more options to be able to both be efficient and cost effective in how they implement AI.
At Lumen, we have a mix of the frontier models that we are using and testing for security purposes to really monitor and continue to evolve our defensive capabilities. But we also have use cases for open weight models as well. And I want to take this question from a slightly different approach, which is for an organization our size, adapting to change at the rate that we are having to adapt to change really becomes a people issue as much as it is, are we going with open weight, closed weight? Those questions are going to evolve over time. And so one of the things we're really focused on at Lumen is empowering our people with the skills they need to survive in this rapidly changing environment. We talk often about being a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all at Lumen. It's kind of one of our core values. And so our strategy, we are very cognizant, our strategy will shift over time as we learn, as things evolve and things change. But similar to AT&T, this is not a new issue for us. We have been using AI and network management practices for years. Obviously, the use cases are changing, but it's not a new issue.
I just want to say, from a consumer perspective, again, it's kind of like there's good news, there's bad news. Obviously, job security, particularly for these frontline jobs that are being increasingly replaced by AI agents, which is a process that's been going on for years, creates concern. It creates concern, I would say, probably much more for older subscribers than for younger subscribers about the where do I talk to a person, damn it, talk to person, which is a problem for the consumer experience, particularly for older, those who are less comfortable with the AI chat agents. The good news is you can have the networks run much more reliably and efficiently. The problem for carriers is we expect the networks to run much more reliably and more efficiently, and so those improvements are good. You're finally doing the job, whereas more of the external, even if it is more efficient and cost-saving, and consumers, I suspect, as the technology matures and the customer base changes, will accept these more. But at least in the short term, there is some consumer resentment with regard to displacement of these forward-facing things by AI.
And Harold, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just pick up on what we were talking about on the side, which is where these open weight models come into the picture. How do you see this kind of maybe democratizing some of the AI, I guess, inputs that we're seeing in the networks now?
Well, at public knowledge, we're very supportive of open weight and sort of open source generally within AI, what we like to think of as public AI. We think it's important for competition. We're seeing, in fact, the evolution we saw in open source, where companies who are finding that this sort of software meets their needs can save a great deal of money and can customize their experience in ways that they couldn't necessarily do with proprietary software. So we think that that's very important. There is the same concern, though, as with everything else, of where does the power come from? Where does the, are you guys running your own little mini data centers in order to maintain your own open weight, which may be great, may not be great, or are you using open weight providers? These are important questions for how the industry is going to be involved, and they bring in questions of the hardening of the network, which folks have mentioned, but not just against cyber security, but also with regard to natural disasters that may impact your own data center or computing providers, where capacities that are now central to the operation of the network go down, even if the network itself is still up.
So just want to clarify before we move on from this topic, when we're talking about open weight models, crucially this means that you are not paying for those tokens that you would be spending on to access to these proprietary models. Is that right?
Right. If you're running the open weight model on your own hardware, it's just the cost of the energy to run that GPU that you own, that you already own. So.
I'm sure most people in the audience know this, right? But tokens are essentially, it is a way to pay for compute within frontier models, right? So we may not be paying for the tokens, we're still paying for the compute, for the energy to run it, right? But this is where the kind of the democratization, the increasing competition comes from. Suddenly we're not reliant on the resources of the frontier model, I don't even know, manufacturers, right? The companies that we read about every day in the newspaper. We can build our own, we can work with open weight models, we can work with alternative parties. It really increases our ability and flexibility.
And we have been pushing back very hard against what we see as pressure against the open weight model. We do not, you hear stories of, oh, well, it's less controllable and less secure if you can't, and we had the same scare tactics with open source software. And we think that, they are not They are not believable. Nevertheless, there is concern, especially where we're seeing things like export controls being used even in regard to the frontier models. Are we going to see a successful campaign as the competition from open weight continues to emerge? Are we going to see pressure against open weight using similar tactics that we saw with regard to open source software? That's something we care about a great deal at PK.
So I've got one more question from me, and then I want to save some time for questions from the audience. So start thinking about what you'd like to ask our esteemed panelists. I want to touch on another topic that's sort of two sides of the same coin: network security advantages versus the network security risks that AI can introduce. As we saw recently with the Hugging Face attack, sometimes these models can break containment and behave destructively in ways that they were never intended to. How are you all thinking about balancing the risks and rewards of AI from a security perspective in your organization? Open question for the table.
So I would say this is something we think about a lot, right? And there's obviously a real balance between the risks and rewards that AI has created, and particularly on the frontier side, really, sort of the frontier models have created a number of security risks just by, Anthropic. With Mythos, we've created a number of security risks that we were not aware of before. But then also AI and the tools we use for AI creates a lot of security, increases our security in a number of ways. So our CSO is really kind of hyper-focused on creating this balance between where we're applying frontier models to look for insecurities, how quickly we can patch those, which also, by the way, is improved by AI, and really focusing on third-party suppliers, policy and governance requirements, testing and validation. All of these become hyper important to make sure we're getting that right balance.
So, yeah.
Steal a phrase from my panelists. Oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
From my panelists here, there's good news and then there's bad news. And so we're going to focus a little bit on the good news and what we're able to do with this, but really we're focused on reinforcing the fundamentals. So we're improving our patching speed, enhancing our monitoring capabilities, embedding protections further and further into the network. And we're also using it to automate our defenses. We are really looking at this not just one particular frontier model, but we don't rely on one model for our security defenses. We're taking a multi-model approach and using all of those in our testing environments to make sure that we are ahead of any vulnerability detection that they have. So we're active in this space. It is something that we think about, talk about at the most senior levels of our company every day. It's not a new space to us. We have internal to Lumen, we have what's called our Black Lotus Labs team, which really is focused on threat detection on the backbone of the network every day. And we work closely with our government partners to do that.
So yeah, just to state the obvious, software runs these networks. And with the tools that are being developed, the frontier models and the like, you can now find and create or find vulnerabilities and exploit them at a pace that is unprecedented. And you can also now, as Giulia and Melissa have alluded to, patch them more quickly too. But it's effectively an arms race. To say that only the good guys have access to these tools is just not true. So we are, as an industry, we are engaged in an arms race. We have to now find the vulnerabilities and patch them more quickly and at a pace that just has changed literally in the last 6 months. And it's caused everybody across the supply chain to galvanize around we just have to do this much faster and much quicker than we ever have before.
We believe that this is a place where the FCC can play a constructive role, not as a regulator necessarily, but as a convener. The agency has a responsibility to understand the networks that it supervises and to facilitate the defense of these networks. And I would say, in fact, national security and cybersecurity has been creeping up as at least one of the FCC's priorities. There is a lot of opportunity here for the FCC to play as I say, more of a convening role than a regulatory role in bringing companies together in a way that guarantees that there are no antitrust concerns to facilitate the development of best practices and share experiences in the way that, frankly, we have learned to do in other areas in cybersecurity generally.
That's
I
an
would
interesting
also
point.
just add, we're not waiting for the FCC to tell us
Right.
to do this. We communicate on a quite literally daily basis with several three-letter agencies as well as the White House on a wide variety of these. And earlier this year, many of our members and us have stood up and started convening the C2 ISAC, which is essentially a way for us to share vulnerabilities in the net, to ensure that the right information is being passed in a safely proprietary and good with the lawyers way to ensure that we can all be as strong as we can be together.
And I think we've also taken it a step further as an industry, working with the financial sector as well to do some of this in anticipation of the threats.
Great.
And
well-
I just have to stress, in a networked environment, your vulnerabilities are my vulnerabilities because we have to interconnect with each other to make this work. So being able to work collectively is extraordinarily important in this context.
We've only got a couple more minutes, but I see some of our audience members are ready with questions. I'm going to go first to you here in the front.
Thanks. It's a quick one for you, Melissa. You mentioned that the problem is permitting with respect to your fiber builds, not the build time, but the permitting. And I've seen where opponents of a data center or those who are afraid of AI can game the process for zoning approvals and rezoning. But does the permit process that you use, is it vulnerable to having opponents intervene in ways to block or stall your permits on fiber?
Sorry, can you say your name?
Steve Del Bianco.
Thanks, Steve.
Steve, it's a great question, and it's actually something that we've been talking about a lot recently with my team that works in local communities. This was not an issue that we saw 6 months ago, but it is a question that we get now. And in a world in which my unmanned, pre-manufactured ILA hut that I need to put in my right-of-way is on the docket behind a 200-person multi-tenant building, there are ripe opportunities for opponents to come forward and use this process, use the permitting process as a vehicle to cause delays. We have not seen something stopped because of this concern around data center development today, but the chatter is increasing. It's something that we're monitoring very closely.
All right.
I should
think
also add at the state level and at the local jurisdiction level, we are increasingly monitoring what are bills and rules to prevent sort of large data centers from coming in, where the rules and the definitions are squishy, and where we're fighting against getting our existing network architecture that's been in the ground there for a long time kind of caught up with these anti-data center bills in a way that's problematic for us.
All right, at risk of going over time, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Okay, I haven't looked at this side of the room much. Is there anything over here? Otherwise, I'm going to go to you here in the front. Great.
Thanks. Yeah, hi, Jeff Baumgartner with Light Reading. Now, with looking at the traffic trends with AI and how it's going to kind of change the shape of traffic and so forth, where do you need to invest in the network to kind of grapple with what's kind of on the horizon? I hear capacity, I hear upstream, I hear latency, but which one is kind of the priority, or like what's the weakest link in the chain right now, potentially, as this trend continues? Thanks.
I think, as we think about sort of the technologies, the next generation of technologies, we always want to make sure we can continue to scale them over time. If you think about on the HFC side, we continue to scale DOCSIS and continue to drive additional capacity so members can continue to make sure that they are ready for this sort of potential or this coming traffic that we know is coming. And on the fiber side, it's the same way. We continue to increase the standards from 25 GPON, 50 GPON, and beyond. So the technology is there, and we are sort of continuing to advance it so that we are ready for those coming wave of additional traffic and the performance requirements around it.
I mean, I think where we see the greatest need is where we're investing on these long-haul routes, data center to data center, the intercity routes. We are seeing our hyperscalers and neoclouds and all others, with the latency requirements, they want more direct connections into their data centers, and so that's really where we're investing.
If I can put in a plug from a consumer perspective, I would say we need more Wi-Fi 7 routers. For consumers, this mostly comes out of the wireless router at home. And if you do not have Wi-Fi that is capable of supporting the capacity that we're looking at now, there's no benefit to the consumer. The benefit is severely curtailed. I'll also mention that we're still using the 100 up, 20 down definition of broadband, as the FCC just demonstrated in its most recent 706. Perhaps, given all of this, it's time for the FCC to consider not just moving something higher, but moving towards a more symmetric measure for broadband in the AI age.
All right, I think that's a great spot to leave it. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you to our great panelists. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too.
Mind you, of course, I don't know if we could get our Wi-Fi routers approved off the covered list, but
That's for another conversation.
yeah.
Well done, team.
Thank you. Good.
Well, I'll give it a pass. Thank you.